thing about the house is it's a sort of a marriage, isn't it? The house has its own character. I have my character. It takes years to build an atmosphere up or to keep it going, but, you know, a day to get rid of it. I'm retired now. I used to be a teacher of acting, and then before that I was an actor. And I was born here. I was brought up in Canada. I came back to England to study drama at LAMDA, London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. And now the funny thing is I live 10 miles away from where I was born. At this time in the morning, I'm finishing my own tea, right? The bell rings and it's the local, the local street people. They have a place to live, but they really come every morning and they want some tea or money towards tea, and I give them £1. So I have to go and do that now because they're out there now. Hi George, how are you?
We're all right.
You mind being filmed?
Hey? Oh, no. I don't want...
You want your money?
Yeah, this is Uncle Rodney.
Take
a picture.
This is George, the local glue sniffer.
Local friends of Tara.
Here's £2 for you. That's for you both. Bye-bye, George. Oh, well, I am an uncle. There are still people making a lot of noise. It's still a bit rowdy and rough, which is what attracted me to the area in the first place. There are still prostitutes in alleyways, and there are still alcoholics and glue sniffers. And so despite all the fashion and the British art that has moved in here, the new British art and that, it still has a bit of grittiness from the 19th century, say. Here we have the famous mosque. But you can see from the sundial clock on the top, it was built as a Huguenot church in 1743, has this wonderful Latin motto, Umbra Summus, we are shadows. It's always been an area here of immigration. The Huguenots came, the Irish, the Jews, the Bangladeshi, and so it's always been a great sort of melting pot, and people from all over Europe in the 19th century came here first before they moved on. It was quite extraordinary. It was like stepping into another century, the 18th century, and it was very run down. It was still a commercial area, sweatshops, leather shops, clothing shops, so it had lots of energy. But it had just really begun to be saved from the demolition people. We met Dan Cruikshank earlier, and he was one of the people who brought the area into prominence, and we squatted certain buildings to save them, and I was partly a part of that. When I first came, and the house looked quite gloomy because now it's been cleaned to some extent, and it impressed me with its age. It's 50 years before the Declaration of Independence, 1726. So, I mean, that's amazing, you know. I mean, so I was drawn to the history of it, and so was my mother. And we were even more sort of emotionally drawn to it when we went into the house. You know, it was quite atmospheric, even though it was all painted turquoise. This is Percy King. My sister and I knew him as Uncle Percy. We used to write him letters from Toronto when we were growing up, and alas, we never met him. My mother knew him very well because she grew up with him, and her mother, my grandmother, was his housekeeper. He was a teacher as well as being an athlete, and in the Great War, the First War, he was honourably discharged. He lost his hand, and here we have the certificate signed by George V. And I think he may have been He never married, so I wondered if he might have been gay, and so I felt an affinity with him there. And he left his house in Austerley to my grandmother, who left it to my mother, who left it to me. So at the end of the 60s, I had £8,000. I moved and lived in Highbury at the time, but I was able, with the money I got from selling half a house in Highbury, to move here with my mother. And I feel I owe him that, because £8,000 was a lot of money in 1968 or something. And so I feel an affinity with him, and a great gratitude, and a sadness that I never knew him, never met him. I came to this place 30 years ago this month, actually, but my mother had moved in 6 months before, in May 1980. And my mother had at the time been living in Liverpool Road in Islington, and she had an accident and broke her hip, and somewhat disarmingly said to me that the doctor said that now she had to live with her son. So I had not lived with my mother for 20 years, and I said to her that if we were going to live together, we'd have to, A, find a place we could afford, B, find a place in an interesting area, and one that was large enough to accommodate us both so we could have different lifestyles. Everything was painted turquoise blue, and it was an Indian cab rank, and there were pictures of Indian film stars all over the panelling. Despite that, there was still a sense of real atmosphere in the house of the past, and most of the original features of the house were still there. There was lots and lots of panelling. I have some old pictures of it. I mean, it looked quite abandoned, and I don't think there had been much life in it. People hadn't been living in the house for a while. It was more of a business, I think. It was hard for me. I'd never taken on such a big project to imagine what it could be. And that took a long time, long after the builders had gone, really until about the end of the 80s. I didn't really get on with how this place was going to look, and it began to take shape really in the last 20 years, and it's a kind of growing, it's always changing, there's still lives everywhere, and it's evolving, really. Funnily enough, this is one of the rooms that I haven't slept in. I've slept in most of the rooms in the house, and I haven't slept here. My guests stay here, and they say what a wonderful room it is, and they love all the objects and things, and it reminds them of childhood and things. And I think I've got to spend the night here, and the reason I don't is because it doesn't have a telephone, and we're so attached to things like that. I think, the phone might ring and I might miss it, but I'm going to give it a go before I pass to the happy hunting grounds, as they say. God. This is a picture of the market when it was still a market. This is about 1982, and that's me when I was younger. I guess I was 42. And you can see obviously the forklift trucks and the old ways of carrying the barrows and that, and the rainy sort of tarmac street, which is quite different. Essentially, this Brushfield Street view still exists, but you get the feeling of it being, all these people have gone, you see. You get the feeling of what it was like. It was a working class area, and very hard working, and now it's become much sort of glitzier, and Patisserie Valerie is here, and all the different coffee shops. but I just am so identified with the place and the street. And, you know, the fact that the glue sniffer knocks on the door, I mean, that's part of my life, you know, and saying hello to the people in the street and walking up and down. And I'm writing all about this, so this is what I write about, the street, which is fascinating to me. So I'm going to be here, I pray to God, until I die. The longer I stayed in the house, the more I realized there were certain things I couldn't do. If, say, I'd wanted to paint all the rooms pink as opposed to turquoise, I could have done that in the first month. But afterwards I thought, no, they wouldn't quite, the house, you know, there's a feeling, it sounds a bit pretentious, but that the house has its own say. And you have a little tug of war and you say, I'm going to put a modern thing here and do a modern thing there, that's all right. But there's a certain things I couldn't do because the house, in a way, would be saying, no, I don't want that. I don't want that. So that's the spirit of the house, I guess, you know. The thing about the house is it's a sort of a marriage, isn't it? The house has its own character. I have my character. The house is really saying, I want to remain like this, but you can do this just a little bit. You can change it a bit, but I still want my personality and you can still have yours. Here I am in the northeast corner of the garden where my mother used to sit until she died in 1988, and she loved sitting here in the late afternoon, and she loved it particularly because the view towards the steeple of the church is exactly the same view that would have been in 1726. Nothing has changed in the skyline since then. And then she loved looking up at the tree that we both planted, and we got it from the council. I chose a silver birch because it reminded me of my upbringing in Canada, and silver birches were used by the Native Americans to build their canoes and to write on. So that's lovely, the bark, and I have that memory from the past of her and of our upbringing, my sister and I, in Canada. So I had this thought that as my mother is remembered here by this plaque on the wall, that when I die, I'll be placed in ashes. My ashes will be placed in a casket beneath her tablet, and I have these two tiles of an archer that I can put on either side, and this would be my way of remaining part of the house and part of the garden, so even though it was built up and changed, I'd still be here and she'd still be here.